I'm David Green from the Sociology Department here at John Jay College, and I'm talking here with Shadd Maruna. When criminologists tend to talk about American punishment, what do we tend to overlook?
Punishment has to be looked at from multiple disciplines, and so the conversation now has gotten fascinating, and we're now looking from an anthropology point of view, from sociology, of course, but historical, political, psychological, or social psychology, where I come from, and philosophical, theological. So there's a great number of perspectives that can be brought to the table. Sometimes I think the one perspective, and it's like the blind man and the elephant, and we're looking at the elephant from all these point of views. Sometimes I think the perspective we're missing in criminology is the elephant herself, and that might be the perspective of those who are going through the punishment. I think at times we can get to the same place with a lot less people involved by simply talking to those who've gone through the experience, and they can provide us much of the same information about the psychology and the history and the politics and the anthropology. And certainly that's one of the things I've found rich in my own work, that to have discussions about punishment, first and foremost, we need to be talking with the punished.
You mentioned your own work. I wanted to ask you about the work you've done with Anna King in the past that draws on methods and concepts from social psychology, which I think are largely overlooked in a lot of the criminological literature. But I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about that work and what you found.
Yeah, Anna King and I started a project. We called it the CU Pub. We were both at Cambridge University Public Opinion Project, and we were interested in punitiveness largely as a result of in my earlier work in dealing with prisoner reentry and reintegration. So often would come up the idea that, well, that all sounds great, but what about the public? And it struck me that we often talked about the public and communities in the same kind of ways. We talked about people we call offenders in kind of mythical ways, and I wanted to try to better understand community views with that project. And as you say, we did draw on social psychology. In particular, we were interested in attribution theory and the notion of people's explanations for crime, and how that impacts their views on what we should do about crime. And that's quite common in a legal standpoint, in a philosophical standpoint, in many fields. We talk about this core question of is the person responsible, personally responsible, blameworthy, are they morally culpable for what they did, and if so, that determines how we punish. But social psychology, and to get to your question, has taken that question further, because this is what they do. It's crucial to across disciplines, but in social psychology, they've really taken apart these attributions for cause and effect. And they've looked at different dimensions beyond internal and external attributions. So we look at stability of attributions. We look at the globalness or specificity of attributions. And Anna and I in our work found that some of these other dimensions may be more important, and that we may be overly fixated on this question of is the person to blame? Did they do it because they wanted to, or did they do it because of their circumstances? What may be just as important is how stable are the causes of that behavior. And we found one of the best predictors of punitiveness was whether people thought that offenders could change, or the people we call offenders. Those who saw no hope of redemption for individuals, whether they thought the person was to blame for their offending or not, simply thought, well, if this is a person who's permanently different than you or I, we need to be protected from that person, and I want to see them in prison. I don't want to see them on my streets. And so focusing on that redeemability dimension, rather than did they know what they were doing was wrong? Were they pushed into it? And the kind of the mind reading about the past, to more focus on, is this person redeemable? Can they change, or can people in general change their behaviors? Maybe a more fertile ground for public debate.
That ties in really well with my next question, which is how optimistic are you about the penal climate changing? I've been really interested in the movement on the right in this question, and a lot of folks with evangelical roots and evangelical justifications for their approaches to this stuff have been using the word redemption a lot. And I'm just wondering if that leads you to be more optimistic that we can have a shift in the way we conceive of offender.
In general, I'm as skeptical as all of us are about the current moment and bipartisan. We've been here before with left and right coalescing, and it always ends up for the worse. So we have to be skeptical. But I think one of the positiveness has come out of your own writing. One of the positive signs about this left-right coalition is that it started with reentry and started with the kind of redeemability question that I'm talking about. Now, the way reentry is posed on both sides, I think it's problematic. On the left, it's much too need-based, and it's, we want to help these people, let's throw some programs at them. On the right, I think it's too faith-based, and the problems in that history of criminal justice. But nonetheless, it has opened the door, the reentry, and Louis Buquan and others have been very skeptical about just how genuine any of this belief in reentry is, and I think that there's definitely justified in what a small drip in a huge sea of punitiveness. But I think that drip has opened the door, if I can really mix bizarre metaphors. I see some hope in that drop, and I think that drop has opened a door, a conversation about the people in prison, the people we imprison as fellow human beings, in the sense that you can't be for reentry in the way that advocates on the left and right are saying they're for, without, at some level, saying that I would open the door to having an ex-prisoner part of the conversation. And when you bring ex-prisoners to the table and humanize them in the way that we were talking about earlier, I think automatically you're going to see a change in conversation and policy as well. So I think I have a lot of hope for where we could go with this current interest in reentry.
Thank you, Shadd. Appreciate it.
Thank you.